The Kasant Objective, a short story by Reher. Are you sure this is it? The question hung in the air, like one of the drifting holograms Zio had scattered across the room, his idea of keeping everyone sane during long hauls. Half of the bridge displayed a glorious 180-degree view of their galaxy's broad swath of light, but apparently the ship's AI thought that a little clutter was just what was needed here today. Jace walked through a hollow representation of a nearby solar system. It was upside down, as was the projection of what seemed to be a dancer. He stopped before a manual control interface near the helm. After a moment, Osha shifted away from it to allow him access. Her expression suggested that his question was, at this point, pretty much rhetorical, although she refrained from rolling her jewel eyes. He loaded a tracing of their long route from their home system, each jump marked in neat lines, and frowned at the path like a man checking the map back home before stepping off the edge of the known universe. "Not scared, are you?" Osha said with a slow smile that told him that confiding his misgivings to her would just end in derisive gossip around the dinner table. Jace ignored her and added the coordinates of the gateway, the elusive D-brain, up to the forward display. The symbols glowed in white and red, beckoning the approaching fleet of explorers to leap into another universe. Treasure hunters, Jace thought, letting his eyes shift to Osha. She stood with her arms crossed and her head cocked before the panoramic view screen, a buccaneer in search of fame and riches, surveying the shores of some distant land. Except, of course, that they still had to cross the distance to get there. "Zio," he said to the air. "Yes, Jace?" Jace looked up, although the toneless voice, male today, emanated from the wall behind him. The dancer, an outlander tetrapod, cavorted up there in triplicate now, twirling to some music that perhaps only the ship heard. "Let's get ready for the leap," he said, watching the control interface begin the thousands of tasks that would ensure that this little expedition remained alive during the voyage. "And clean this up," he added, waving at the solar system now orbiting Osha. Zio dutifully removed the holograms, and the bridge seemed larger now, although Jace was rarely bothered by small ships. Small ships made for smaller crews and a lot less trouble, he thought, although this crew made up for it with their own peculiarities. He returned to the concave wall to gaze out into space, black sky pricked by distant stars, denser toward the center of their galaxy, stretched out into forever. The 4 ships accompanying them cruised in a wide sprawl, and now, at Zio's signal, began to converge on this location. The silence up here, and out there, was bothersome today. Looking out at the approaching ships, he could almost see the silence. "Music, Zio," he said, barely audible. A soft rhythm from his favorite collection filled the room, and he breathed deeply. "You're tense, Captain," Osha said. When he looked up, the smirk was still on her lovely face. "It'll check out, you'll see. We'll be back in the sector before breakfast." "You hope." Both of them turned when the door slid aside, allowing light from the hall to seep into this dim space. Jace smiled when he saw Reher enter the bridge, followed by their one and only passenger. The overbearingly large Chidean bustled past her and rushed to look outside, perhaps unaware that the curved panorama was simply a display screen in the windowless chamber. He looked a little paler today, and Jace wondered if the conditions aboard this vessel suited the creature. Reher had done her best to learn about his people and make him comfortable, but, to Jace, the man looked ill. Their delightfully wealthy passenger placed his blunt fingers on the screen and drawled something in that odd cadence that none of them had been able to master. When Reher shrugged, Zio translated. "Mr. Tenzo would like to go right now." Jace tipped his chin toward the approaching escort ships. "When we're together, we're doing this just once. Mr. Tenzo asks if your ships are perhaps inadequate." Jace threw an accusing look at Osha. It was her idea, all of this. He had wanted nothing to do with the project from the moment she presented it to the boss. No real research opportunity, only a questionable return on their investment, and a fair chance of ending up smashed into bits when trying to jump through an unknown breach. He relished the rare thrill of dipping into another layer of this onion they called a universe, but not when the landing site was little more than rumor, legend, and the word of this foreigner nearly trembling with excitement. But Osha's daddy owned the company, owned the ships, and pretty much owned any future mission Jace could hope to command. He reflected mournfully upon the loss of his own vessel, the Kalium, before putting that memory aside. This was now, and he was a hired hand who no longer had the luxury of picking and choosing his assignments. So when she dug up Mr. Tenzo and his treasure map, he was at the mercy of her ability to manipulate the boss. "Ask Mr. Tenzo to return to his cabin below so that we can get ready," Jace said. "Mr. Tenzo wishes to stay up here." "Of course he does," Jace muttered. He caught a gentle smile playing at the corners of Ranael's lips. Her eyes gleamed with good humor, as always, and he reminded himself that some parts of this dreary trip had, so far, been downright pleasurable. He returned her smile, noting how beautifully the elegant swoop of her cheekbone was taken up by the design of the pretty exocortex shell cradling her skull. He shook himself out of this mood and gestured to Zio's ever-present eyes to open the ship's comm system, even though the AI would by now have alerted their little fleet of their imminent jump. To some, their destination was a distant point in their vast galaxy. To others, another dimension. To Jace, neither theory mattered as long as the breach, wherever it terminated, included a return trip. "Jace here," he said to the crew, a talented assortment of pilots, ex-military members, adventurers, and mercenaries. "Stations, everyone. We'll take an inverse formation. Who knows what's on the other side?" "You're not probing?" came Captain Naka's voice from one of the other ships, sounding a little doubtful. "We won't maintain the field long enough to get any meaningful return, not with 5 ships, and we'll probably run into considerable dilation." The last comment was meant for Osha, whose eyes narrowed. They had argued this for weeks now. Time dilation rarely affected brief jumps. On the remote chance that anything of significance was encountered, who really cared what time it was for anyone? This, though, was a different matter entirely. Agatenzo had brought to them the coordinates of what was thought to be the last known location of the Kasant expedition, lost nearly 60 stat years ago. It had taken that long for their distress beacon to reach anyone able to interpret it, and then to find its way into Osha's eager hands. No one knew how much time had passed for them, or if any of them were still alive. Jace's crew had embarked on this 3-month journey mostly for Tenzo's monumental fee, traversing the distance in a fraction of the time it would have taken his people. And now they had arrived at this unknown breach, at the edge of what could only vaguely be called explored space. When the Kasant expedition had lost its fuel, only 2 choices were open to them. They could drift here in wait for rescue that might not come for centuries, or they could go into this breach in hope of finding some safe haven. "Let's do this," he said. "They're either there or they're not, alive or not. We'll soon find out. They can't have drifted too far, right, Zio?" "Are you looking for an exact projection, Jace?" "No, Zio. I'm pretty sure they're nearby, if anything is left of them." He placed his hand on one of the interface panels and began to guide the ship toward the coordinates still illuminated on the screen before them. The other ships, more streamlined and most definitely more heavily armed than this one, came into formation, tight enough to hook into the D-brain and slip into whatever lay on the other side. Even Osha was not immune to the instinctive terror of the unknown. What they were doing was frowned upon in polite circles and officially forbidden by most governments. It also made companies like theirs ridiculously wealthy and formed the very foundation of deep space exploration. While they had never come across any living matter in any of their dips into another verse, they had twice sold maps and sensor readings to mining companies at spectacular profit margins. "Zio, let's have a nice tight bubble." Jace smiled reassuringly at Ranael. She, part of their crew as their ambassador and cultural expert, had made only a few of these leaps so far, but she just took a deep breath and kept her calm eyes on the displays. Now encased and ready to be gripped, The fleet made contact with the thread to be sucked like some tasty morsel into an unfathomable creature floating in these reaches. For all of his reluctance to indulge OSHA's treasure hunt out here, Jace exulted in the utter thrill of entering a universe none of their peers had ever seen. They could end up in endlessly empty space, or perhaps buried in some piece of debris, or even just disintegrate into components when hitting some unknown anomaly on the other side. Until someone, an expedition just like theirs, returned with charts and maps and sensor readings, any leap into these breaches was considered a suicide mission. A shudder ran through the ship, but the crash couches and safety restraints used for entering an atmosphere remained below the smooth floor panels. A transit like this had no real physical impact on their well-shielded ships. The screens flickered as the sensors tried to make sense of what was happening outside, and then just gave up and showed a swirling pattern of nonsense. It took just moments until Zio brought them into alignment again, the traverse completed. Rana-El sighed quietly, and Aga Tenzo shook his shaggy head when they all felt the odd shift of their physical senses accepting a new reality. Their little bubble of null energy was all that protected them now from the massive burst of radiation emitting from the rift, sure to puzzle some distant world a few millennia from now. One by one, the screens before them came back online. And here, in front of the backdrop of stars, looming large and rather healthy-looking, a colorful planet hung in space like a jewel. Osha clapped her hands and whooped gleefully. They were alive, and they had a planet in view. Both of these things belonged firmly in the plus column. "All ships have made a successful transit," Zio reported. "Let's get busy," Jace said. "Full scan of that planet and see if there's any sign of Mr. Tenzo's people. Well, or anybody." They, like the crew members aboard the other ships, took up their research stations to sift Zio's reports, already accumulating at a terrific speed, for anything interesting or unusual. The planet's mineral composition and other resources, living organisms, the nearby star, and any hint of technology had to be examined for clues to the value of this expedition. And of course, the region would be scanned for signs of the missing Kasant expedition. Zio interrupted before they had even settled into their task. Jace looked up when the main screen's output zoomed more tightly onto the planet. "We are being scanned," Zio said. "What?" Osha snapped. "From the ground, extensive populations on all major continents, marginally industrialized communities, primitive. They are using electromagnetic frequencies to scan the skies in this direction." "Gods, go dark!" Jace shifted the comm system to include the other ships. "Going dark. Stealth protocol. Zio, get us out of here." "We can't jump back yet," Osha protested. "Still calibrating." "Mr. Tenzo indicates that there is a moon," Zio said. "I have located it." "He's right," Rana-El said, pointing to her screen where one of the probes now showed the satellite. "Synchronous orbit. Eccentric." "Head for that," Jace said, frowning at Tenzo, who was now hovering over Rana-El to study her displays. He addressed the fleet. "Stay far side until Zio finds a place to land." It took only moments for the ships to return to a tight formation and swoop toward the moon on the other side of the planet. Zio displayed an overlay of the broad sweeps of the planetary detection system. Jace exhaled sharply when the indicators showed their own defensive systems scattering the beams around their shielded hulls and out into space. "Nice work," Jace said, relieved. "Echo? Feedback? Did anything make it back?" "Unknown," Zio replied. "I am still probing their communication systems. Deciphering them will take time." Jace nodded to Rana-El to work directly with Zio. There was nothing she could do more quickly than the AI, but she would add the sentient intuition Zio lacked to catch nuances and patterns in speech and symbolism. "Look," Osha said, at almost the same time as ex-soldier and now captain Naka aboard one of the other ships. She switched the main screen to focus on the moon's surface. "Structures!" "Scan that," Jace said, squinting at a sprawling conglomerate of intentional design in the barren landscape. "No significant living organisms," Zio said, not distracted by the order while working with Rana-El. "Microbial at best, but external air quality is insufficient for such growth." Tenzo turned to Jace and began to speak, perhaps forgetting that none of them understood his language. "Translate, Zio," Jace said, wishing he had insisted that their passengers stay below until they had secured their arrival in this space. "Mr. Tenzo says that those structures belong to his people. He recognizes the Chaldean markings on the exteriors." "Do you? I had no idea their fleet was so large." "Yes, that ribbed hull design is unique to Chaldea." "Guess we found the Kasant mission," Osha grinned, but left out the "I told you so." "I say we check it out." Jace signaled the others to circle the shallow crater, where the tangle of structures revealed itself to be the remnants of several black sky exploration ships. They had been grounded close together and joined in places, forming something resembling a habitat or outpost station. "Touchdown near that escarpment," Jace said. He waited for Naka's cruiser to land, and then cozied up next to him. "What's the weather like, Zio?" "You want to go out there?" Rana L. said, looking up from her data. "Of course he does," Osha said. "Finally something to do on this jaunt." "Atmospheric conditions are acceptable," Zio said. "0.16 gravity. I recommend the Haz shield suits until we've scanned the interior more thoroughly." "Hear that, Naka?" Jace said. "It's you, me, and Osha for now. Suit up and let's go take a look. Meet us by that round portal. Looks like it might be the way in." Aga Tenzo gestured wildly while Zio translated his demand to accompany them to the station. Jace scowled. "We can probably use him to make sense of the place," Osha said. "I'm not that up on their tech." 60-year-old tech. I doubt he is either. Resigned, Jace motioned their passenger to follow them into the narrow hallway outside the bridge and then down into the lower level of the ship. "Zio, are the locals operating anything off-planet?" "Nothing outside the planet's atmosphere," Zio replied, "and nothing on the long-range scanners. No other ships or satellites in sensor range." "Send a few drones to the surface. Speed up your findings. Stay dark. I want to know why the Kasant group decided to land up here." "Probably hostiles on the planet," Osha decided. "I'm guessing pathogens," Jace said, "or some other environmentals." He nodded to Tenzo. "They seem a little chunky with all that blubber they're carrying. Could be air pressure or gravity, too." He winced when he heard Zio chatter in Tenzo's rapid language. "You don't have to translate everything I say, Zio." "Understood, Jace." The trio stepped into the airlock to slip into loose-fitting suits, simple layers of protection relying on an envelope of shielding generated by a series of patches front and back. "Is that necessary?" Jace said when Osha added a projector to her exocortex assembly, giving her mental control of the weapons embedded in various components of her suit. "Zio's been confused before, if you recall." "Not by a simple life sign scan," he countered, but he said nothing more. After all, their welfare was her job, and she did it best, fully armed. He had to admit she looked rather heroic with the two slim barrels at the sides of her exocortex. The ship's lock opened, and they stepped outside and onto the arid surface of the moon. Not sure if Aga Tenzo was quite familiar with gravity variations, Osha kept her hand on a strap dangling from his belt. Naka, his face obscured by the visor of his suit, awaited them near the metal door of the rambling Kasant structure. "Not locked," he said. He turned to operate a switch by the gate. "Solar generation still working, except for a wing over at the far side. Senda's crew is checking out the debris field. Probably just garbage." The door slid halfway aside and then stopped with a shudder. They slipped into the airlock beyond and waited for Tenzo to squeeze his bulk through the narrow opening. Osha opened a pouch and released a swarm of palm-sized drones to explore the corridors that branched out ahead of them. One of them almost immediately signaled the presence of a comm station nearby, while the small lights of the others were soon swallowed by the gloom. Jace approached the comm station and tapped on the interface panel. It came to life, but he recognized little of what was displayed there. "Zio?" he said, making sure the camera at his collarbone recorded the activity on the screen. He touched a sensor to it, and waited while Zio browsed through the system. "The Kasant AI is not available," Zio reported. This was expected. Without an authorized, living, sentient mind to give meaning to its operation, their AI would have shut down, a mechanism designed into these systems after the first of them went rogue. "The database is heavily fragmented," Zio continued. "You were correct. They built this installation by converting their transports into a habitat. I've indicated control stations on your device." Jace glanced at the map now hovering in front of him. "This way," he said to the others. "There is something still operating in that segment up ahead." Osha walked beside him, peering suspiciously into every dimly lit corner as they passed. Behind them came Tenzo, nearly filling the corridor, which must have been uncomfortably tight for the Chidean crew. How long had they lived up here? Jace wondered. Why had they left? Naka followed a few steps behind, his eyes on the scanner feeding information to Zio for analysis. "So, where is everybody?" Osha asked. "I was half expecting to see dead bodies everywhere." "I have detected a few storage pods with desiccated remains," Zio reported, "but not enough to account for the entire crew. It appears that one of the shuttles is missing. We may assume that any survivors have gone down to the planet." "Seems sensible," Jace said. He stepped through what had once been a pressure door into another vessel. The seal no longer held, but the transition from one to the next was little more than a step up. The passage opened into what looked to be some sort of lab space. Work tables, storage, equipment neatly organized on shelves. "See if you can reach their database, Zio. Maybe we can access their logs." "What's all this?" Naka said, looking around the high-ceilinged space. "Seems medical." He pressed a tab on a foam metal box, but the lid didn't budge. He ducked out of the way when Tenzo suddenly reached over his head to tug a panel from the wall above. They watched in silent amazement when the Chidean activated an input window, clearly familiar with the system. "He's downloading something," Osha guessed. "Zio, can you tell what it is?" "No, this is new to me." "Try to get at it anyway," she said. "Whatever it is, our guest seems to know exactly what to do with it." Naka had wandered around the central counter that dominated the room to inspect a row of opaque cylinders. "Want to bet there are body parts in here?" he joked. "Or dinner, maybe." "Can you identify those, Zio?" Jace directed his camera and sensor feed toward the bins. "Embryos in stasis. Zygotes." Naka cursed. "What were they doing with those?" "Dinner, maybe," Osha quipped, ignoring his grimace. She peered at the equipment arranged along the walls, no doubt already adding up salvage profits. Their share of whatever Tenzo hoped to find here was generous. "What do you think that is? A weapon?" "A type of gene gun," Zio said after conferring with Mr. Tenzo, who answered the questions somewhat absent-mindedly, still busy with his file transfer. "What did these people need a gene gun for on this trip?" Jace said. He tried to peer into an eyepiece, but his visor got in the way. The device was inactive anyway. He studied the cabinets lining the room and the instruments tucked into shelves. Could they have been studying the planet below? "Seems likely," Zio said. "I am detecting scientific equipment and very specialized laboratories throughout the complex, more than they would have needed for their intended mission." Osha propped her fists onto her hip as she surveyed the room. "This is a science lab? All of this?" Her eyes traveled to Tenzo. Then coming here was no accident, no emergency. That fleet was heading out to survey the Boris Quad when they got stuck, or so their signal said, according to this guy. She jerked her chin into Tenzo's direction. They shouldn't have needed anything more than a clinic aboard. Jace peered at Tenzo. An unpleasant, nagging thought had wormed its way into his brain. "Zio, identify the embryos in those tubs. Are they Chidean?" Some lights blinked briefly on a strip of indicators above them. "Yes, 30 viable specimens at various stages. Include a search of Chidean life signs down on the planet. I have questions." "They're not likely to be down there," Rana, still aboard their ship, was heard through their earpieces.
The environment is hazardous, not immediately deadly to Chidians, but not suitable for habitation. I've already accounted for a half-dozen airborne particles that would harm them.
What about our crew?
We're going down there?
She exclaimed. Not all of us. There was a brief pause during which he fancied she might have been silently voicing her worry for him.
Radiation,
she said finally.
Ultraviolet is far too high, for one. Also, some radiation produced by them, communication, I guess, will interfere with our exocortices. Some unpleasant pathogens in the air can harm us as well.
So nothing deadly?
Not immediately, she said, somewhat primly. What are you hoping to find down there? You know better than to try to walk into a place that hasn't had a first contact experience.
I think they have. Jace tapped a finger on one of the cylinders on the counter. With customized Chidians. Zio, do you have a visual of the locals on the planet? A hologram appeared before them, stuck halfway in the lab counter until Jace stepped away from it to give his projector some room. Naka, beside him, muttered an oath. They sure look a lot like Chiddies, he said, looking from the hologram to Tenzo and back again. Jace let the image spin slowly before them. Bipedal, like all of them, upright, multi-jointed. Much of the male's body was covered in hair, like Tenzo's visible bits. And like Tenzo, it either had no exocortex or its species had not yet invented them. It seemed heftier then and not as smooth-featured as the Chidians, and there were remnants of claws on its short fingers. Creating a disguise by tweaking a few genes would not have been a difficult achievement for the Chidians. Furry thing, isn't it? He said, watching the excitement on Tenzo's face as he prattled with Zio. What's he saying, Zio? Zio abridged what was surely a longer conversation. He wants to meet them. No doubt. Not so sure the rest of us will fit right in, though.
Jace, Rana said, I've found nothing to indicate that there has ever been any first contact. We haven't got through the languages yet, but so far, this species seems to consider itself to be unique on this planet, as is usually the case in places like these. If there are Chidians down there, they've not announced their presence.
Jace nodded, mostly to himself. First contact was not in their contract. Dangerous, messy, and entirely too far out of their realm of expertise. Zio, have you found Chidian DNA? Yes. I've located nearly 2,000 individuals so far, but we have scanned only 1/5 of the planet's primary species. 2,000? Naka snickered. And I thought your people weren't the romantic types, Mr. Tenzo. Would you like me to translate that? Zio asked. No. I've found no actual Chidians, Zio continued. The carriers of their DNA are showing genetic manipulation. What are you saying? Naka looked at the stasis chambers as if with new eyes. They're hybrids? Using local DNA? Jace gestured at the gene gun. Nothing so slow, I think. The suspicion that had wormed its way into the back of his mind didn't seem so far-fetched now. He turned to Aga Tenzo. Translate directly, Zio, he said before addressing their sponsor. The Kasant expedition wasn't just exploring the rifts, were they? This is no coincidence. They knew this planet was here and had evolved a very compatible species. Tenzo glanced from him to Osha and back again. Yes. Jace gazed at the mute containers of frozen life, perhaps no longer entirely Chidian, waiting in vain for someone to wake it. They meant to come here, he said. These are test subjects. But the real work was done on the passengers that came here with the fleet. This base was set up to prepare them to go down to the surface safely, using gene therapy, altering their DNA to withstand the planet's conditions. I will bet that some of the ships up here were used as habitats during the process. Osha gasped. Who would possibly volunteer for something like that? And it worked, Jace continued, when Tenzo said nothing. And you're here to check on their progress. They're thriving, multiplying down there, just as you hoped. Isn't that right? Why would they do that? Naka said. After glaring at everyone for a moment, Tenzo raised his hands in a sweeping gesture. Chidea Uban is a dying world, Zio translated. We will bring our people here. Kasant's objective was to prepare the way for us and to develop the gene therapies we need to undertake before landing. They served as a vanguard to seed the planet with our people, to learn how to live here. He looked away from Osha's furious expression to appeal to Naka, who just looked stunned by this revelation. We feel that we belong here. This planet has produced our mirror selves. Look at them. We will make them better as we share their world. Think of this as a metamorphosis.
I think of this as colonization,
Reher said.
Kasant's presence will have changed everything, changed their evolution.
Tenzo shrugged angrily. Out of necessity, our knowledge is fed to the local population in measured amounts to help develop their technologies. We will need landing sites and power sources that don't exist now, and leaders among them who will ease our arrival. That too is evolution. Jace crossed his arms. Then we'll let them evolve without us, he said, angry at having the entire company dragged into this. We've done some questionable things for fun and profit, but I'm not making this crew part of some planetary takeover. He signaled Osha to keep an eye on the Chidean. Zio, delete whatever Mr. Tenzo just downloaded from the system. That research belongs to us, Tenzo exclaimed. Decades of work. I have to report back to my people. Then hire someone else. This isn't what I signed up for. We'll return your fee. Jace saw an objection on Osha's face. Minus the transit expenses. My people will not stand for this. Jace didn't need Reher's intuition to recognize the desperation on the man's face. He smiled grimly. Your people don't know, do they? Why hire a private prospecting outfit? Explorers do. Even scientists do, but not governments trying to keep their species alive. He raised his arms to encompass the lab. This experiment is still a secret. You think the end result will justify the means of achieving it.
Experimenting on unborn Chideans before applying the alterations to the adult volunteers,
Reher said, disgust clear in her voice.
Hard to justify.
Tenzo scowled. How we operate is not... I have located the missing ship, Jace, Zio interrupted, startling all of them. What? On the surface, not operational. The Kasant AI is there as well. A stunned silence followed Zio's announcement as each of them tried to digest his words. The AI? Osha gasped. Down there? On the planet? Operational? Only the transponder is active.
Good God,
Reher whispered. Back to the ships, Jace said, heading for the exit. Zio, pinpoint the exact location of the ship and the AI. The others hurried after him, past the startled Chidean who was only now receiving the news from Zio. Naka, you and Senda will take us down, Jace said. My ship and Zio will sandbox up here. We're not risking another AI in the hands of a primitive species. They slipped through the half-open exterior door and hurried back to the ships. Zio, see if you can find out who the AI is tied to, if anyone. That model is fairly autonomous, Zio replied. As long as it detects Chidean brainwaves, it'll operate. Can it detect any of these 2,000 you've found so far? They would have to be in close proximity. Jace led the group up a short ramp into his ship. When you said that the AI wasn't available, Zio, you could have said it was gone. That's not the same thing, you know. Noted, Jace. They re-entered the bridge, where display screens now showed the dizzying viewpoints of several probes searching the planet. They seemed to be honing in on a flat, arid region devoid of habitation. Thankfully, at least, the Kasant crew had decided to land their ship away from the local population. If they abandoned the moonbase, Aga Tenzo said from the door to the bridge as Zio translated, reminding them of his presence, their studies must be complete. They will have joined the indigenous species to await our arrival. After sending a message that you claim to be a distress signal, Osha hissed. And we fell for it. That AI has a self-contained power supply to last hundreds of years, Jace said. If someone manages to open it, it will poison the entire population. Pray to your gods that someone down there knows what it is." "What do you mean?" Tenzo said. When Jace did not reply, Rana L spoke. "They may have left, gatekeepers of sorts, guides, people who know how to keep the processor safe, perhaps to be used later when they are ready for such a tool." "For such a weapon," Jace amended. "They have barely left their own surface, never mind the atmosphere. Imagine what they do with the AI's computing power, even without a database to give it meaning." "This was not our intention," Tenzo objected. "So it would seem," Rana L said. "So far, I've not found any indication that the natives are aware of the Chidean presence, or at least it's not common knowledge. But there are rumors of others." "What sort of rumors?" "I'm not sure. There is so much information. Like on many worlds, the primary species here is not peaceful. They are distrustful of others, so there is much disagreement. But they have started to look to the skies in fear." Osha shrugged. "Ancient gods, probably." "Perhaps," Rana L said. "Very likely, actually. There are references that make more sense now. I'll have Zio pull them together. But my guess is that the Chideans have been here for a long time, or more than once. Perhaps over hundreds of years. I suppose they might be likened to gods." "Probably scouting," Jace said. "Checking up on their creation, feeding them bits of technology to speed up their evolution, as Tenzo calls it." He kept his eyes on a screen showing little more than desert, afraid he might get the urge to strangle Tenzo. Or Osha, for that matter. None of this had seemed right from the start. "We will inform others of what you have done here, Tenzo," he said. "They won't let you bring your people here. They will send guards to that rift to stop you." "Why do you care?" the Chidean raged. "This has nothing to do with you. People migrate. People colonize. Such is life." Jace looked over to Rana L, who regarded him calmly, her gentle smile telling of her approval and agreement. He doubted Osha was currently smiling. She'd be the one to explain the lack of full payment to the boss. "That planet already has a colony," he said. "We have learned from our past." "What about our future? How dare you interfere?" When Jace didn't bother to answer, Tenzo turned to Rana L, but she simply returned to her work on the incoming data. At last, the Chideans stormed from the bridge. "We are interfering," Rana L said to the silence that followed. "If we stop the Chideans, those who are left down there could suffer. Someday, the people will discover DNA, or find the moon base, and they'll track down the hybrids among them. That may not go well for anyone." "They better keep breeding like mad then," Osha scoffed. "Zio," Jace said, unwilling to ponder Rana L's suggestion. "Monitor Mr. Tenzo from here on. Let me know if he goes anywhere but his cabin. He's not to communicate with anyone once we get back into home space. We'll hand him over to the Compact Council." "Understood, Jace." "There's an easier way," Osha said. Jace furrowed his brow. She had a thoughtful look that he didn't like. "What way?" "Leave him here. Get rid of him. Let them think his mission failed, that the Kasant mission failed." He heard Rana L's small gasp. "They'll just send someone else." "It'll buy time," Osha said. "There will be war over this. If his people are desperate, they won't be stopped from coming here. This planet has no defenses. We'll end up having to guard these people until they can defend themselves, or we get tired of fighting over them." She was right. Probably. Their own history was filled with bitter wars, and sometimes entire planets were lost to the conquerors. Some prospered. Many didn't. A long, silent moment ticked by before Jace shook his head. "We're explorers for hire. Prospectors. Maybe we're also smugglers at times, but we are not murderers. I left the military for a reason, and so did you, Osha. We're going to try to grab the AI, and then we're getting back home before breakfast, like you promised, to make our report. Let the council figure this out." OSHA's icy glare was well practiced, but had long ago ceased to have any effect on him. She backed down. So, are we keeping the AI at least? If we can get it wiped and sold on Duoro, it'll pay for this trip. Damn right we're keeping it. The two ships under Jace's command approached the planet within the hour. That's it down there, Naka gestured at a blip on the map before them. He eased the ship down toward the sprawl of buildings surrounded by vast scrublands. They had come in silently, two ships at dawn, their shielding too slippery for any planet-side scanning and tracking systems. Jace supposed that someone out here, looking up into the sky, might have noticed their vague shadows hovering in the night, or watched them seemingly disappear again, their movement too fast to track with the eye. Why am I not surprised to find the AI so heavily guarded? OSHA said, scanning the perimeter of what looked like the sort of bunkers they had seen in other places. Tall fencing surrounded the compound. There is a warren of tunnels beneath all that, fortified. Can we get through that? Jace said. She waved a long-fingered hand as if nothing they saw here was of any consequence. Can you do this without shooting anybody? Rana L, still strapped into her seat behind them, asked. OSHA glanced at the woman with a hint of a sneer. As long as no one gets in my way, sure. Jace turned as well. We have little choice, Ron, but I don't think they have any way to stop us. There is nothing down there that can harm us without causing a whole lot of damage to their own people. There's no reason to hurt anyone. OSHA pretended not to notice that his last words were directed at her. The drones had done their job. The Kasant AI was located here, below ground, transmitting little more than a thread of a signal. Zeo, their own, more advanced system, had remained safely on the moon, its signal amplified by a nearby drone and picked up by their exocortices. The interference that was currently frustrating the ground-based scanners affected them too, but they had covered their heads with protective hoods that matched their tight gray bodysuits. Small filters inserted into their nasal passages sufficed down here, and none of them carried visible weapons. It made all of them feel absurdly naked, but Rana L hoped to present them as unthreatening as possible. The locals would likely not comprehend the firepower of their ships, and it would take only a thought to enable their individual shields if the need arose. Here we go, friends, Naka said. Before they had even touched down, a surge of people emerged from the buildings, most of them carrying what were surely weapons. Judging by the raised voices and arm-waving, Jace guessed that no one here had been prepared for the visitors dropping from the sky into their yard. Look at them all, OSHA said, amused. They really do look an awful lot like Chaldeans. Hairy giants. As they had planned, Jace, Rana L, OSHA, and two of Senda's crew emerged from their ships without fanfare, closing the gates before anyone thought to take a look inside the airlock. The air pressure here seemed oppressive, the light of the nearby star too bright despite their opaque eye covers, but compared to places they had visited in the past, they were able to move easily. Jace had no intention of indulging in proper first contact protocols with these people. He led the others toward the building Zeo had identified, not surprised when some of the tall natives stalked toward them, as lumbering and stiff as Aga Tenzo, who was currently sulking in his locked cabin on the moon. Are you detecting any of those altered Chaldeans here, Zeo? Jace transmitted to his AI as he raised his hand in what they believed to be a greeting. A small patch on his palm sampled the air for DNA. Yes, Jace. 3 at least are showing switched genes. There may be more below ground, but I cannot probe that deeply. The stout male to your left, also the 2 males in the blue clothing. By now they were surrounded by people dressed alike in colors as drab as the desert, weapons aimed at the visitors. Rana L stepped forward. Please let us pass, she said after signaling Zeo to translate via a speaker embedded in her exocortex. There was an astonished silence, and then one of the people before them spoke, saying something in a harsh voice that made clear his objection to her request. Zeo had to fill in a few patches and omit some phrases, but the language he had learned was sufficient. Rana El turned to the towering native Zio had pointed out. She hid her fear well, Jace thought, but then it wasn't likely that this person could interpret her expression anyway. "We know who you are," she said firmly. "You have something that doesn't belong here. We have come for it." The hybrid glanced at the other of his kind, looking nervous and perhaps a little angry, if their experience with Tenzo's people allowed them the comparison. After a moment, Zio translated his words. "We can't let you." "You have no choice," Osha said, already impatient with this palaver. "Who are you?" the hybrid said. "Why are you doing this?" "That doesn't matter," Osha said, "but we are watching you. Zio, cease translation," Rana El snapped. "Understood." "Tell them nothing," Rana El said to Osha, her voice sharp. "They don't need to know. Let's be gone and let others handle this." "Agreed," Jace said, absurdly pleased by Osha's expression of surprise over Rana El's directive. "Let's move. Stay together. Just keep walking." One of the men aimed a weapon at his chest when the visitors continued their approach to the building. Someone else shouted something. A man reached out to grasp Rana El's shielded arm, which slipped out of his grasp as if oiled. More shouting. It did not take long before someone fired a projectile weapon. The bullet glanced off Osha's shield and struck the ground beside someone's foot. Jace's small group moved steadily forward, untouched by the attempts to stop them. Uncaring of the live fire, unstoppable by hands and fists. When another bullet deflected from Jace into a man's leg, someone finally gave the order to cease fire. Now 3 hulking males blocked their way into the broad entrance door of the building. "Osha," Jace said, "just demonstrate. Nothing more." She bit back a grin and pointed the emitter extension at the tip of her finger at a man's leg. He screeched, surprised by the sudden pain, and collapsed on the ground, twitching. More shouting erupted when the others jumped aside. Clearly enjoying herself, she pointed her finger at someone else. Finally, the Chaldean hybrid among them made himself heard above the din. "Translate, Zio," Jace said. They listened to a somewhat garbled interpretation, but the meaning was clear. The man, perhaps some sort of leader, urged the others to stand down. Grudgingly, the men backed off, but guns remained fixed on the newcomers. "Tell them to stay out of our way," Jace said to the man. "They can't stop us. It is not our intent to hurt anyone, but our weapons can destroy this place and everything within it. Don't make that necessary." The Chaldean regarded him warily, then looked back at the 2 alien ships crouched behind them like some mythical menace come to life. After some silent moments of thought, he motioned his people to back away from the door. Jace hid his sigh of relief from his own team as much as these natives. Blasting this place to bits was certainly within their capabilities, but it would do little more than kill a whole lot of bystanders. The AI, in its housing, would withstand even the weaponry packed into Naka's cruiser. "You've come for the spaceship?" the hybrid said with a nervous glance at the men surrounding them at a distance now, his voice barely audible. "Just a part of it," Jace replied. Indeed, they did not have the crew to remove the shuttle, even if it were in transport condition, but its parts were useless without the AI. He turned to look over his team. "Osha and Naka with me. The rest stay with the ships. Don't engage unless threatened." He strode toward the building, not waiting to see if the local people followed. Someone rushed to open the door for them, and they stepped into the cool darkness beyond. "Zio," he said, looking up at their 2 mute and unwilling escorts. "Monitor their movements and make sure they don't find a way to barricade us in here." Osha snickered. "With what? There is no security here to speak of, no cohesive network, not even electronics. Zio can cut their power if anything is electrified. Brawn, bricks, guns is all they have." "Yeah," he said. "Feels weird." They traversed dimly lit corridors and several stairways, counting 3 descending levels into the ground. They met no one down here. Perhaps the people who staffed this place had been ordered away. The only sound was their footfalls on metal floors. Zio's signal suffered from the layers of rock and metal that made up the underground installation, but the connection held. "It's in here," Jace said, stopping at a door Zio had pointed out. The hybrid, silent during their progress through these halls, moved to open it for them, and walked ahead into a storage room, or perhaps a workshop. The other man remained in the hall. Jace peered into the dim, cavernous space. No one waited here for them in ambush. Equipment and pieces that seemed to belong to planes and other airships cluttered massive shelves and had been collected in piles everywhere, leaving space between them for people to get around. Zio's interpretation of their scanners led them to a heap of twisted metal. Osha gasped. They crashed? The hybrid nodded. On their last trip here from up there. We believe it was done on purpose. The fire consumed much of it. Did they survive? Jace asked. We found no bodies. If they lived, they did not stay with the wreck. Jace prodded a shred of a tail section with his foot. This, then, confirmed it. These hybrids were experiments, never meant to leave this place again, serving only to support Chidean theories. For how many generations had the mission experts visited to inspect their progeny, perhaps to cut up one or two of them to see how their bodies fared in this environment? And did this person know? How much did any of them know? He ached to ask them. This man seemed to be one of the gatekeepers Ranael had assumed would be here, but this was beyond his skills and experience. He said nothing. What did you come for? The hybrid said to Osha, who was inspecting a jumble of parts on a shelf. After a little rummaging, she held up a diamond-shaped object, rounded on one end and somewhat spongy to the touch. This. What is it? He said. We've not been able to identify it. Piece of art, Osha said, and marched past him back to the door. Brigadier General Malcolm Groves barely waited until the jeep delivering him from the airfield came to a halt before the administrative bunker of the base. Leaping from the vehicle, he ignored the salutes of the personnel who got in his way and strode past the startled secretary sitting outside Colonel Farrow's office. "Farrow!" he barked when he entered without knocking. The sight that met him was not what he had expected. With a quick look over his shoulder, he slammed the door to the hall. Glenn Farrow sat behind his desk, uniform jacket carelessly unbuttoned, a cigar smoldering in the brimming ashtray before him. His slack-jawed stare was on a calendar across the room. The corner of the June page moved listlessly in the current of a desktop fan, revealing and hiding Marilyn's glorious legs as it oscillated. "Glenn?" Groves said. He noticed a half-empty bottle of booze on the cabinet behind the officer. "Damn it, what's gotten into you? Report!" Farrow turned his head. "Damage control's underway. We've moved personnel, sanitized the landing area, destroyed all recordings. This didn't happen." The general frowned. "What about the men? Do you want to know?" Groves started to say something, and then just exhaled sharply. He shook his head. "Do you think they found the Luna site?" Farrow's pale eyes traveled to his. "We didn't even see them coming. Of course they found it. For all we know, they're living up there right now." His listless fingers spun a piece of paper on his desk. "They are watching, so they said." "Did they say how many there were? What they wanted, other than that rubber thing?" "They said nothing, but they know who we are, and don't seem happy about it." Groves sighed. "We need to regroup. We can deal with this. I'm taking your report to Langley. Did you get any photos of them?" It pointed a finger, and our film turned black. The colonel looked down and then pushed the piece of paper toward the general, turning it as he did so. "This is their leader. At least we can pick them out of a lineup if they come back." He thought about this. When they come back. Groves whistled under his breath as he studied the drawing of the aliens that had come to visit. Thin and gray, with arms reaching nearly to their knees, their slight bodies looked as if they would have a hard time supporting their massive, hairless heads. It was the eyes, even in this crude sketch, that caught his attention. Huge, dark, and flat, they seemed to mock him, taunt him, with a promise.
Thank you for listening to The Kasant Objective, a short story by Reher. Look for other free stories by this author here on YouTube. Chris Reher's sci-fi space opera novels are available at Amazon, Kobo, Apple Books, and Google Play. Audiobooks with human voice narration are available via Audible and Amazon. Links below. Copyright 2025. Chris Reher. All rights reserved.